3, 2, 1.
You make a mistake on Twitter, or even something that isn't a mistake, and you can pay what feels to be a pretty high price.
Right.
Now, whether it is a high price or not is hard to tell, because Twitter is so weirdly fictional. It's so hard to get a grasp on exactly what's going on.
Well, it's also your comprehension of what is your emotional reaction to people that you don't know being mean to you. Like, this is like, what is that price?
Well,
and some people want to dismiss that as being just nothing. It's not that big a deal, but it is a big deal. It causes people to commit suicide. I mean, it has, absolutely. Bullying online has caused many people to commit suicide.
Well, the thing is, when the weird thing about that online communication is that, like, I find that I tend to react to a negative Twitter comment as if it's someone sitting across from me talking to me that I know. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not. And I don't even know if the person is real, because the accounts are often anonymous, right? So that person isn't really real. But your emotional response is still, well, someone's gone out of their way to be harshly critical to you.
Right.
And that doesn't happen that often in your day-to-day life. And so, if you're a reasonable person, you're very sensitive to criticism,
right,
because it's rare and because you might be wrong, especially if there's a lot of people criticizing you, because you kind of have to be psychopathic in order just to brush that off. It's like, well, 100 people think I'm wrong. There's nothing to that. It's like, well, if it's 100 people out of 100 million, but you can't tell on Twitter,
right.
then it's irrelevant. But if it's a mob of 100 people that show up outside your house, which is quite kind of what Twitter feels like, then you think, well, God, I must have done something wrong, because otherwise why would all these people be here? Because the people who are motivated by hate are going to be a lot more vicious in their attempts to eradicate than you're going to be, what would you call it, effective in your attempts to save. That whole game, that whole identity politics game, that is dangerous beyond belief. And it's predicated fundamentally on resentment and the desire to devolve people back into a tribal antagonism. And so it cheapens everything. And then the other thing that I think is happening is that as the mainstream media, television in particular, dies, the quality people are starting to desert, like rats leaving a sinking ship. I guess they're good rats if they're quality people, but and then there's ever more enticement to use clickbait journalism to attract a diminishing portion of the remaining audience.
Yeah.
It's like one of the things that's happened. So if you look at the 5 major indices of violent crime in the United States, they've declined by 50% in 25 years. It's absolutely beyond comprehension. It's so good. This includes violent gun crime, by the way. And yet the reports of violence in media have gone up and up and up and up. Think, well, what's going on? It's like, well, it's clickbait. It's the equivalent of clickbait. And then to turn everything into a polarized political discussion takes no real intellectual energy, but it's also driven by the death spiral of the classic media, I think. And so that's what's happening at the New York Times. And not with everyone there, but with plenty of them. And it'll die faster than people think.
But it's so confusing to me that it didn't used to be that.
Yeah.
And now it is. And are they just responding to this new world where you have to have clickbait journalism and, where people are struggling to find people to actually buy physical newspapers, which is it's a different thing.
It's hard to say, because it's weird because you don't have to resort to clickbait, because these long-form discussions are the antithesis of clickbait, right?
Right, but are they struggling in terms of how many people buy their newspaper?
Oh, absolutely. Every newspaper. The newspapers in Canada went cap in hand to the federal government for subsidies about 6 months ago because they're dying so fast. And so some of it is they're being supplanted by technology. That's a huge part of it. But as they are supplanted, they get more desperate. They publish more polarizing stories. That works in the short term to garner more views, but it alienates people from the brand and speeds their demise. Classic death spiral of a big organization.
What did it take to wake me up with this? I'm not a farmer by nature or anything else. I was a biologist. My passion was wildlife. Now, when I, as a young man, went into colonial service, we started to set aside incredible areas of Africa as future national parks. And we removed the people from there who were gardening, drum beating, firing, muzzle-loading guns, doing all the things you can't have in a national park. So as bureaucrats, we were good liars. We removed them for their own good because of tsetse fly. Total lie, because they'd lived with tsetse flies for thousands of years. But we intended to form national parks. Now, no sooner did we do that than the land began to deteriorate, as we see there. Now, there were no livestock, no sheep, no goats, no camels. There was only elephants, buffalo, eland, kudu, all the rest of the animals. So, like a good scientist, I realized it has to be too many animals, wildlife. It has to be too many elephants, too many buffalo. So I did the research and I proved there were too many. Established the research, the data, it all proved it, because we scientists are human. We interpret data to fit our beliefs. We don't fit our beliefs to the data and realize that the data is telling us our belief is wrong. So I proved there were too many elephants. It was highly controversial because I said we're going to have to start killing thousands of them to bring the stocking rate down to what the land can support. We had my work checked by a team of scientists. They checked it all. They agreed with me. We went ahead. We were all wrong, totally wrong. We shot 40,000 elephants to try to bring the carrying capacity down to what the land could sustain. And it got worse. It didn't get better. Now, that was a big jolt to me, how I could make such a blunder because of my scientific training, my beliefs, as all scientists have. So I really began my re-education over totally again. Left government service, became an independent scientist, and said, I'll support myself in any way I can, but we are going to solve this problem. Now, when I got to the United States, and we never could have discovered what I'm telling you tonight in any one country, any one institution, the clues were scattered around the world. When I got to the United States, I got a terrible shock to see national parks like this. This is a national park. That is desertification as bad as anything in Africa. And I didn't even find curiosity amongst scientists as to why is this happening in a national park. That's had no livestock, so there must be something here more than livestock causing this, which has become a scientifically valid truth, even though there's no science whatsoever to back it. But it's become a scientifically valid truth, as I say. I then began looking at experimental plots all over the western United States. They were put in many years ago when the government wanted to shoot 50,000 sheep of the Navajos. They needed data to back that policy, so experimental plots were put in. If you stop grazing the grass, it grows. The grass grew, they took the photographs, shot the sheep, but the desertification got worse. Thank God they left the plots. So I went finding these plots all over the western United States, and here is one. I took these pictures from a position paper on climate change of the International Range Society. And the caption, I shortened it slightly there for you, was that livestock were removed in the 50s, but processes resulting in the replacement of grass with shrubs continued. That had been green grassland, it had become desert, and the desert bushes have increased, and it's described as processes in a peer-reviewed paper. What processes? Nobody curious about it. Our beliefs were just so deep that rest couldn't be doing this.
And what you find in that interpretation is that the preconceptions of the individuals involved are being imposed upon the evidence, which then turns out to support their preconceptions. And that's not a scientific way of doing things. A scientific way of doing things is testing hypotheses and seeking to falsify them and seeing if they work out.
So the problem is drawing these conclusions and then being too rigid with these conclusions upon the further evidence.
That's my view.
Yeah.
And he said, well, in science, we do trust the work of other scientists. We don't really question it. We don't really investigate it. That's their side of the business. Just here. I think this is generally true across other disciplines as well. These days, academics are driven by the need to publish research papers. That's what they build their careers on. If they can get a paper on their bit of research published in Nature or the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, etc., that's good for their careers. See, the thing about democracies is that in order to get things done in a democracy, you need to persuade people of your point of view. So information becomes very important in democracies. And information can be abused. People can be misled with information. They can be told that what they're receiving is the truth, whereas in fact it's not the truth. And you can end up with a kind of dictatorship that the people have given their assent to on the basis of false information. And frankly, I'd rather have a real dictatorship, which is out in the open and clear, rather than one that has been subtly manipulated into position through manipulating the views of the voters.
Oh, yes.
So you've got Lily D'Ambrosio at the moment, who's the Environment Minister, who's kind of pretty much the government spokesperson on this disaster, this fiasco. All she has to do is make some simple changes, and she's just like this. It's going great. It's going great. Nothing to see here. I make no apologies. I make no apologies.
Yes.
Well, you should make some fucking apologies when all you have to do is tweak the program.
Yeah. I don't care. Do whatever face-saving shit you need to preserve your ego. Just fix the problem.
How we would look for a new law. In general, we look for a new law by the following process. First, we guess it. Then we well, don't laugh, that's really true. Then we compute the consequences of the guess to see what, if this is right, if this law that we guessed is right, we see what it would imply, and then we compare those computation results to nature, or we say compare to experiment or experience. Compare it directly with observation to see if it works. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. And that simple statement is the key to science. It doesn't make a difference how beautiful your guess is. It doesn't make a difference how smart you are who made the guess or what his name is. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. That's all there is to it.